Okay, we are going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about the Rococo period and how that originated in Paris and really flourished because of the French aristocracy, and how Rococo was all about fun-loving paintings with playfulness and light, bright colors, almost this ideal romantic fantasy world where it's basically there's not a care in the world, right? Everybody's happy, everybody's frolicking, and it was just very lighthearted and pretty. And during this Rococo period, though, there was a lot of aspects of this style of painting, but not to the extremes that was happening kind of in this French couture. So we started to talk about what was happening with 18th century painting in England. And again, we're going to see that there are some of those characteristics of Rococo, but not so fully embraced. So we did leave off by talking about some contextual information regarding English painting. And there was two huge influences going on here. The first was this concept of satire and how this was actually a literary beginning. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels and Voltaire's Candide were two literary pieces that were extremely groundbreaking in this kind of new technique of poking fun and having, like an oppositional voice against a lot of political systems and upper class. And then, of course, visual artists wanted to kind of, jump on this wagon as well and see what they could do visually with this concept of satire. And we really credit a lot of this progression with satire painting to an English painter called William Hogarth. And we'll be looking at one of his paintings shortly. The other thing that was happening and was very inspirational to, again, visual artists and literary artists was this Age of Enlightenment. We talked briefly about that, also known as the Age of Reason. It was just this huge movement of intellectual and philosophical ideas. We have characteristics like reasoning and skepticism, really questioning authority and questioning how reality was, being played out. Individualism, that, we're not just assimilating to, a thought or a cultural process of an entire group, but, a case-by-case basis. Science, that was becoming really grounded, and people were really starting to put a lot of their faith more in science than this blind faith or superstition. They weren't being so driven by that anymore. They really wanted to be more scientific, be more philosophical, more thoughtful, and acquire knowledge that way. So of course that's going to start affecting visual arts. Because if you take this Rococo period where it was all about fantasy and delight and fun-loving and not a care in the world, and then you shift this, cultural mindset of, hey, I'm really interested in empirical thinking. I really want to understand science and research, and I want my knowledge to be something that is studied and defendable, then you're definitely going to shift away from that frilly kind of Rococo, not just style, but also subject matter. And that's what was happening in England. They were following a little bit heavier this push of satire and this Age of Enlightenment. So that brings us to this first painting by William Hogarth we talked about. The title of the painting is called the Tete-a-Tete from Marriage a la Mode. And from Marriage a la Mode, that is the name of this series. And the Tete a Tete is the name of this individual painting. Okay. It's from 1743, and we're looking at oil on canvas. And just from first glance, I think we can all agree that we can pick up characteristics of Baroque style, but also some characteristics of Rococo. And this is just kind of a visual glimpse. We're not going to get into content too much, but from the Baroque period, we can see that we have that color palette back, right? It's very neutral except for those pretty strong pops of red. We may not have the tenebrism as severely as we did during the Baroque period. We still have high contrast. There's, real darks with very, very brights, but we don't have that extreme light source that Baroque is so known for. But we also can see some elements of Rococo. Not only can we see it a little bit in that interior design. So if we just look at the room for what it's worth and look at how it's decorated, it's very Rococo style. It's elaborate. There's a lot of that molding on the wall, that decorative molding. Just look at the fireplace. You can see those evidence of like ribbon banners and a lot of, heavy detail in that type of interior space. We can see that the walls in the room behind the fireplace room is very white and bright with tall ceilings and appears to have a lot of natural light. So you have that kind of Rococo feel. Also, the way that it is painted, it's very soft. We talked about those edges. They're a little bit, fuzzier and softer and a little bit more playful than those very crisp, like chiaroscuro edges where you may not have outlines per se, but the painting is very modeled and very controlled. Where here, you still can kind of see a lot of soft brushstroke. So definitely by first glance, you can see the influence from both of those periods. The difference is the content. So with Rococo, it would be just a fun-loving day without a care in the world. Little bit of flirtation, little bit of sassiness. That's really what Rococo was all about. Living the high life, about being an aristocrat and being able to do what you want when you want and to dress beautifully all the time, even if you're going to go frolic in the garden. This is much different. So contextually, what we have here is a highly satirical painting. And technically, the whole series is a satire. And it's about English society and those who, like to try to buy their way into that high society. The tete-a-tete is basically, when you interpret it, about partners pursuing pleasures without each other directly after marriage. So again, kind of poking fun at that high society. What we have here is a husband who has been out all night with another woman and causing trouble and getting into fights. And then you have a wife that has been home and gambling all night, playing cards, and basically has lost a fortune and seems to be a trend. And again, they're doing these kind of naughty things apart from each other. They're not, intimate or friendly or close with each other. And it's basically depicting this superficial high society life, that's kind of just full of sin and full of emptiness and just, almost embarrassing the way that they, live their lives. The function of this painting, it's a narrative. Later, it would turn into a series of prints, which was very, very common, so that it could be mass distributed, mass produced, but also widely understood by cultures that, where a lot of people were still illiterate. It's in a sense, a little bit of propaganda as well, because you have an artist here that is kind of pushing an opinion about a group of people. It's probably also meant to cause a little bit of an uprising, but nonetheless, the paintings and the prints themselves are also used for private display. So they are in the households of people who probably have the same agreement and the same mindset. So one of the biggest innovations is, that we have this satire painting, poking fun at the aristocracy, and also still with the theme that, paintings were about private, unspoken domestic truths. These types of situations, they were never spoken about before. It was just, a very unspoken truth, but now they're all being exposed and made fun of and causing people to kind of question these upper class and high societies. When we look at the painting, we can again see that wispy brushstroke, soft edges, a more Baroque color palette. It is an asymmetrical composition. It's still balanced, but it is asymmetrical. And what's very interesting about this is the depth of field. So the perspective is at a diagonal. It's not straight back, but you can see the depth goes from, the front right-hand corner to the back left-hand corner. It's also very good, though, at capturing a lot of expression. Every single person that is portrayed in this portrait is definitely full of expression and a different type of expression. It captures movement. You can see that things are kind of disheveled and overturned, and that, again, we're capturing these people in a certain moment. What we have here is a small group of aristocratic people. On the chair, we have the wife on the left. To the right of her on the other chair, we have the husband, and standing up in the front, we have the steward. At the bottom right corner by the husband, we have a dog that is suspiciously sniffing at a bonnet who does not belong to the wife. And that again symbolizes infidelity of the husband. We also have a broken sword that is laying on the floor, which can symbolize, the loss of a fight, or that, the husband went out and was creating a ruckus. But the fact that the sword is broken is probably a symbol that, he was defeated or lost. Others have interpreted that symbol as a sign of not being able to, have kind of sexual gratification. The steward's expression up on the left is what gives us the indication how much the wife has gambled away their fortune and lost financially. He is holding up a bunch of unpaid bills, and basically is the one that kind of oversees the spending of money, and the fact that he is just in a panic and in complete disarray is an indication that the wife is kind of out of control. We have in the foreground an overturned chair, which, because of the objects around the chair, we're able to note that, there was a violin player there, probably entertaining while she gambled more of their fortune away, but that this violin player had to make a hasty retreat when the husband came home. In the background, there is an onlooker who could be one of their servants that's just kind of observing and spying on, another basically dramatic event between the husband and wife. Basically just a bunch of extremely spoiled brat adults is what this picture is trying to depict. When I compared it to another artwork, I compared it to the Arnolfini portrait, mostly because of the use of symbolism. It's another one of those paintings where it feels really embedded with a bunch of clues. And if your eye can move around the painting in its entirety, you can, start to interpret these symbols and these clues to really get a true understanding of what the painting is about. The second painting under 18th century English painting is number 100, and it's titled A Philosopher Lecturing on the Orrery from 1763 to 1765, another oil on canvas. And this is by Joseph Wright of Derby, England. And what we have here is a very, very traditional, reminiscent Baroque painting, mostly because of that tenebrism. It's really strong and very well captured here. To start off describing this painting, I found a quote from Smart History that I thought was just wonderful. I feel like it really sums up the entire motivation behind this painting, so I'm going to start with that. It read, "Two young boys gazing over the edge of the contraption in playful wonder. A teenaged girl, her arms resting on the machine in quiet contemplation. A young man shielding his eyes from the brilliance of the light emanating from the center, and a young woman staring unblinkingly. A standing man taking copious notes on the proceedings, and another man leaning back in his seat, listening intently to the gray-haired lecturer, captivating his audience like a magician. A key idea of the Age of Enlightenment, that empirical observation, grounded in science and reason, would best advance society. It's expressed by the faces of the individuals in Joseph Wright of Derby's A Philosopher Lecturing on the Orrery." I thought that was just a really lovely way of giving you some content to all of the people that were depicted in this painting, but also just really what this artist is trying to capture. But getting into a little bit more specifics, contextually, the information we have here is the artist, Joseph Wright of Derby. He basically titled himself that, Joseph Wright of Derby, and that's because there was another artist working regionally in that same area in the same time period who shared the same name, and he wanted to have a distinction between him and the other Joseph Wright. So he titled himself Joseph Wright of Derby. He was very influenced in this piece by the Lunar Society. So it was a group of intellectuals who would meet once a month to discuss current scientific discoveries and developments. So Joseph Wright of Derby would attend a lot of these society meetings and study the intellects that were coming together to ponder and to advance their knowledge and understanding of space and science. Now, an orrery is an early form of a planetarium that kind of imitate the motion of our solar system. So up here on the left, I put an image from a museum of an orrery. And this is exactly what's being depicted in Joseph Wright's painting. Content, what we have here is a group of middle-class people representing men of all ages, women and men of all ages. And I think that's really important. That was not chosen. Joseph Wright of Derby definitely chose that with much intention to try to show that this Age of Enlightenment was a movement for the masses, that this Age of Reason was something that was going to advance everybody, not just a certain sex or gender or class or society, that it was going to improve and enhance culture for everybody. The expressions are so curious, contemplative, wondrous, and fascinated. The philosopher is also loosely based off of Sir Isaac Newton. He's demonstrating an eclipse, and he stops to clarify a point to the note taker on his left. The lamp in the center of the orrery is out of view, but that is the light source. That is what is illuminating the scene, which gives it that beautiful Baroque tenebrism. What is so fascinating as well is that this painting compositionally is put together to also have like meaning within the meaning, but each face in the painting surrounded by this orrery depicts a certain phase of the moon. And I just thought that that is an absolutely brilliant and genius way for an artist to, load up the painting with double meaning, to arrange this composition so well that you're giving just such deep symbolism from simple things like the light source and the placement of everybody. And it just is like this stacking of symbolism and makes for such a strong, strong piece. Form, we have that dramatic lighting. We talked about the Tenebroso technique. We do have an informal composition arrangement that is revolving around this light source. Remember, formal means it's triangular composition. So because we don't have that, we have more of an informal composition. Of course, we have high contrast. The function of this is to showcase the pursuit of enlightenment through scientific discovery by making a historical painting. So not only is it recording history, but again, it has this mission to kind of capture, the wonder of this this movement that, hey, everybody, look, if you become involved in this enlightenment movement, if you become involved and buy into this age of reason, look at how wonderful it is. Look at how everybody is so enlightened and interested and captivated, that this is almost like, trying to sell this to other people to, hey, get involved in this. Look at what we're doing. Look at what great things are happening right now. The more, the merrier kind of thing. The innovation remains kind of the same for this period, that we have this huge shift from religious art to, art that is non-religious, but is definitely a direct reflection on society at the time. I put in here an image that allows you to see the scale of the painting. Another very important thing to make note of, and that was in, the last slide. I put down here a few more paintings done by Joseph Wright of Derby. First of all, to show you that, he had a very consistent style. His light source and use of tenebrism was just really wonderful. But his content really didn't change. He definitely stayed very, very true to this Enlightenment period. So all of his subject matters are about some form of like human discovery and scientific experiment. I know the one on the left here is a laboratory with, developing some sort of like apothecary type of remedies. The one in the center is definitely people coming together and doing some sort of science experiment. And then the one here on the right is just about, that inquisitive look of trying to understand, different forms of science and anatomy. It's just this, this age of wonder. And I think that the use of children was just absolutely genius. It shows that this is the future, basically. And on this page, I just tried to put kind of a close-up of his painting that shows you kind of the expressions of the children that are observing the orrery. when I compared it to another artwork, I got a very close feeling to Woman Holding a Balance. We have that kind of light source effect that I thought was very similar, maybe not as dramatic, but still you can tell there's a single light source, but also just kind of that inquisitive content, using some sort of tool or item and having thoughtful moments, having those like really, really deep moments with yourself, when you can have those conversations with yourself and you're trying to understand something or be inquisitive about something. And just that moment I thought was very similar. Okay, so here's a lot of the vocabulary that we covered. The aristocracy, Age of Enlightenment, satires, and the orrery. Some key points was understanding this Age of Enlightenment, understanding what the French aristocracy was like, and how they became the current patrons of a lot of artistic work, that were dealing with frivolous pleasure scenes, playful figures with pastel colors, but we still are working with dramatic lighting that came from the Baroque period. We're now introducing a lot of natural scenery, but like fantastic nature scenery. And we have huge shifts in thinking, of style, of government, of artists, of society, that we're making really big changes during this time. And it's kind of going to just continue to steamroll right through. Like we're just going to be plowing through huge advances in society and human development. And here are the sources. So I'm reminding you that this PowerPoint in specific kind of modeled the PowerPoints that you are supposed to be creating for your movement of art. So you may use this as a reference to help you. But hopefully that you were able to complete the 18th century English part and have a really strong understanding. From here on out, every movement that comes next, is a direct connection from the movement before it. So it's very important that we grasp and understand the current movement so that we can build upon that knowledge to understand the movements that are coming up ahead.